the Vintage Hollywood Archive. Josephine Baker was a superstar in the 1920s. An American who made France her home, she was also the first black woman to achieve international fame. She went by various nicknames, which included the Black Pearl and Bronze Venus. She also devoted much of her life to fighting racism. Was Josephine Baker a saint or a sinner? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you're new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Vintage Hollywood Archive channel. Josephine Baker, the Princess of Tam Tam. A singer, a spy, and a civil rights pioneer far ahead of her time. At a time when the world is in such disarray, there has never been a more important or more poignant time to remember that everything and anything is possible. The belief that you can be what you want to be and achieve what you want to achieve, irrelevant of where you came from. How do we believe this? By remembering the people before us who did exactly that. This is what Josephine Baker stands for. There are so many elements of her life to discuss and shout about, and many books have been written about her life. So, this reminds us of all of her work, her value, her power, celebrate her lifelong impact, and why we must never allow anyone to forget. Josephine Baker, a sizzling sex symbol with a penchant for scandal as well as showmanship. La Baker, as the French called her, captivated Europe in the 1920s and 30s with her exotic dances and stripteases. Back home, though, Americans were less prepared for a black performer of her flamboyance. She danced at the Folies Bergère wearing only a skirt made of loosely strung bananas, and she never equaled her Parisian success in her native country. Baker was a template for understanding European and American society in the years surrounding World War II, a woman whose views and public speeches sprang from the bitter experiences of her impoverished childhood. We'll hold her up as a mirror in which the entirety of the 20th century transatlantic world is reflected. Picasso painted her. She was irresistibly charismatic. Ernest Hemingway described her as the most sensational woman anybody ever saw. She was a multi-millionaire by the time she was 21. Baker was revolutionary with radical and subversive ideas, but also as someone willing to make a commodity of her body. She was a sexy, primitive creature who used this status to manipulate situations that she felt were important while also being manipulated herself. But why doesn't history talk more about the Black Pearl of Paris? Josephine Baker's life story is unbelievably queer. She was born Freda Josephine McDonald in 1903 in St. Louis, Missouri. There's actually quite a bit of mystery surrounding her birth and the identity of her father. Officially, her father was a drummer named Eddie Carson, but Baker's mother gave birth in an almost exclusively white hospital in St. Louis. She was also allowed to stay in the hospital for several days after her birth. In the early 20th century, the United States was extremely segregated, and St. Louis was no exception. If Baker's mother gained entry into the hospital and was allowed to stay for so long after giving birth, it was likely because a white man, assumedly Baker's real father, was able to pull some strings. This theory was never proved, but it makes a lot of sense. To help support her growing family, at age 8, Josephine cleaned houses and babysat for wealthy white families, often being poorly treated. She briefly returned to school 2 years later before running away from home at age 13 and finding work as a waitress at a club. While working there, she married a man named Willie Wells, from whom she divorced only weeks later. By the age of 15, she had already been married twice and was working full-time as a servant on wages so low she resorted to rifling through public bins for scraps of food. Yet her talent for dancing would provide an escape, leading on to performances on Broadway, and when a talent scout offered her $1,000 a month to join a troupe in Paris, her Cinderella story had truly begun. The segregation in the United States is what led Baker to France. She had already moved from St. Louis to Harlem, New York, where she found greater acceptance, but it was hard to work as a black entertainer in the early 20th century. Baker explained that these experiences growing up taught her to believe that I was inferior, like many colored peoples of the world who are taught every day to feel that they are inferior to white people. Born in America, she came to Paris in 1925, seeking a place where she could be what she wanted to be and live in a world of racial harmony. She witnessed and experienced intense racism in the Midwestern city. As a teen, she suffered physical and sexual abuse in the homes of the white families for whom she worked, and experienced periods of homelessness. She joined traveling black performance troupes as a young teenager in the late 1910s, but even then found it hard to gain a permanent role in their chorus due to its racist hiring practices. At the age of 19, she became an instant success when she performed at the Folies Bergère Theater in her iconic banana skirt. Janet Flatter, a writer for The New Yorker, said this of the opening night: "She was an unforgettable female ebony statue. A scream of salutation spread through the audience. Whatever happened next was unimportant. The two specific elements had been established and were unforgettable. Her magnificent dark body, a new model that to the French proved for the first time that black was beautiful, and the acute response of the white masculine public in the capital of the hedonism of all of Europe." Although the 19-year-old performer wore glamorous outfits as she danced and sang, she was also a comic, flailing her arms and crossing her eyes to make the audience laugh. Her most iconic dance was described as a Charleston, a belly dance, Mama Dink's chicken, bumps, grinds, all in one number with bananas flying. In 1922, she finally earned a chorus role in the traveling production of Noble Cisse and Eubie Blake's musical Shuffle Along, one of the first all-black musicals on Broadway. Her unique, charismatic combination of dance and humor sent her into the spotlight. She was a hit and was instantly loved by the Parisian public. Modern striptease could be considered tame compared with Josephine's sensational sets. She was often joined by her pet cheetah, who would dive into the orchestra pit to the adrenaline-fueled shrieks of the crowd. The cheetah would soon be wearing a diamond collar, costing more than an entire year's salary for the average worker, a far cry from just a few years earlier when Josephine was a servant for a racist family she was forbidden to look in the eye. Finally earning a fortune to match her fame, Baker acquired a gold piano, Marie Antoinette's actual bed, and the diamond-collared cheetah, of course, that caused havoc whenever it jumped into the orchestra pit at her performances. From her famous hairstyles slicked down with egg white to her flamboyant dresses, Baker was celebrated for her style and performed to huge crowds in a city where American culture was viewed as novel and exotic. The love affair was mutual. In 1937, Baker renounced her U.S. citizenship when she married Frenchman Jean Lyon. Baker became a French citizen in 1937 after her marriage. She was disgusted by the treatment of black people in America. Throughout her life, she was rumored to have affairs with women, including one rumored affair with Frida Kahlo. Reports alternate whether or not Baker was open about her sexuality during her lifetime. While she moved in artistic circles where she would have had the opportunity to be more openly fluid, she also lived at a time when and performed for audience where being out on a larger scale could have damaged her career. Elsewhere in Europe, Baker's skimpy outfits and sensual dancing meant she was seen as a danger to moral decency, and during her European tour, her shows were often derailed. In Vienna, the church opposite the venue rang its bell before and during the concert to warn attendees they were committing a sin by seeing Baker perform, while in Zagreb, the show had to close after protesters targeted the theater. By 1952, Baker had been the toast of Paris for decades. The bisexual singer, actress, and dancer became so revered there that one only needed to say Josephine or La Baker, and everyone knew who she was. But beloved though she was in France, she found it heartbreaking that she wasn't as loved in her own country. However, Baker was much more than a performer. She was a woman perceived to be so dangerous that, in the course of her life, the FBI kept 471 pages of files against her. She was practically worshipped by her fans, and rightfully so. She was independent, a flapper, a symbol of the Jazz Age, a civil rights activist, and a spy during World War II. When war was declared in 1939, Paris was filled with refugees fleeing the Germans. Every night after her show, Baker would go to a nearby homeless shelter on Rue de Chevalerie to make beds, bathe old people, and comfort new arrivals. Yet, when the Germans occupied the French capital in the summer of 1940, Baker took on a more dangerous and risky role in the war. She became a spy for the French resistance, reportedly saying, "France made me who I am, the Parisians gave me their hearts, and I am ready to give them my life." Baker's performances provided her with the perfect excuse for traveling across Europe, and as a glamorous star, she was invited to embassy parties wherever she went. At these parties, Baker would eavesdrop and flirt to gather information about German troop locations and airfields from high-ranking Italian, Japanese, and German officials. Fellow secret agent Jacques Abti, masquerading as her assistant, recorded the information in invisible ink on her sheet music, while Baker pinned important photos to her underwear and counted on her fame to avoid a strip search. While in Europe and North Africa, she was welcome in the palaces of kings and queens. At home, Baker could not even walk into certain hotels or order a cup of coffee, simply because she was black. She found this ridiculous, and in 1951, she went on tour around the United States in an effort to help fight segregation. It was written into her contracts that the theaters she played at had to let any ticket holder enter regardless of their skin color. Segregation was not limited to the American South, and Baker had her work cut out. When she arrived in New York City with her husband at the time, Joe Bouillon, they were refused reservations at 36 hotels because she was African American. On August 28, 1963, she was the only official female speaker to speak alongside Martin Luther King at the March on Washington. In her French military uniform, Baker spoke about her own struggle for justice to 250,000 people. Looking out at the mix of races in the crowd, she declared, "Salt and pepper, just what it should be." Yet these actions did not go down well with the FBI, who had a file open against her since 1951 because of her, quote, anti-United States statements and her fight for racial equality, end quote. For 15 years until Baker's 60th birthday, they recorded her actions and called her a Communist Party apologist, not least because she occasionally partied with the Castro brothers in Cuba. With the aim of showing the world that it was possible to break down the barriers of race and nationality, from 1954 onwards, Baker adopted 12 children from countries across the world, including Japan, Algeria, Israel, and Colombia. She styled herself as a universal mother figure to her rainbow tribe. They all lived together in her 15th century castle, the Château de Milande in France's Dordogne Valley, though by that point, Baker's life was plagued by financial hardships. Baker worked on and off from 1959 to 1975, often so she could maintain Les Milandais and her family. She ultimately lost the home, but Grace Kelly, then Princess Grace of Monaco, offered the family a villa. Baker took the stage once more in 1975 and was as much the toast of Paris as she ever was. But the next night, after thunderous applause during her performance, she passed away in her sleep of a cerebral hemorrhage. Some 20,000 people mourned her passing in the streets of Paris. Today, Baker is remembered as one of the first black sex symbols of the 20th century. Whether or not she was out, the unapologetic force of her sexuality set a standard of possibility and positivity for those following her, which was not just groundbreaking, but earth-shattering for a woman of color at the time. And in her lifetime, Baker fought against the racial injustices built into societies around the world, with a special focus on her home country. While much of her work brought about change, and there's still much work to be done, she remains a beacon of what it looks like to use one's platform for good. "People are dying so that you will be able to live in peace," she said in 1952. "Try to understand and love each other before it is too late." If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new here.